So today's talk is super fascinating. Let's have a look at what the title is. The talk is My Experience with Ekhart Tolle. Yeah, nice. So maybe a lot of you don't know that when I was younger, I was a big Tolle fan. Yeah, and as I'm older, I'm still a Tolle fan, but I mean, like, when I was younger, I would listen to his book all the time, as I fell asleep, when I got home from work, when I was studying, when I was on holiday, like constantly. So this was back in the day before it was easy to get downloads off the internet. This is like maybe 2002, so I think his book came out in 2000, The Power of Now. To 2002 to maybe 2006, but I still will listen to him every so often, especially if I can't sleep, or I sometimes listen to his German, him speaking about the subject in German. Yeah, and yeah, he's massive influence on my spiritual path, massive. So before I talk about Ekhart Tolle and my experience with him, I'm first of all going to talk about like what is non-duality, just like the way that I express non-duality, just so we can have like a basis for the talk, and then I'll go on to read some quotes from Ekhart Tolle and talk about it from my experience. Yeah, so what is non-duality? So Ekhart Tolle, I think, was the first non-duality teacher that I ever came across. However, when I first met him, I didn't know what non-duality was. At all. So I was already into Buddhism by this point and other spiritual teachers. But Ekhart Tolle was really radical compared to the Buddhist group that I was into. So in the Buddhist group that I was into, we didn't really talk about no self. We talked about consciousness and that everything's consciousness. But we never really talked about the separation between the personal self and the big consciousness. It kind of was one thing, and you became enlightened. And your consciousness became enlightened. And I never really heard no self before. And like when I got involved with Ekhart, it was really radical. And in the end, I had to make a choice between non-duality and what Ekhart Tolle teaching and Buddhism. Like the Buddhist group at that point weren't willing or ready to accept non-duality. So yeah, it was like a super radical teaching. And now, ironically, if you put it all together, you would say that I'm more radical than Ekhart Tolle, but I remember it being so radical. So let me just go back to what my interpretation is of non-duality, and I feel like it's deeply related to the way that Ekhart Tolle would see it, except he's not so explicit with the way he expresses non-duality. But if you really listen, you really hear like extreme non-duality in the way he speaks. So non-dual understanding is often a precursor to awakening experience from my experience. So you learn non-duality, and then something happens. It's like there is a collapse that happens. And non-duality is the teaching that there isn't a separate entity experiencing this reality. And that's so full on, but to me that seems really natural and normal. It's even weird kind of trying to teach this, because it feels like everyone must and should understand this, and that it's like the fundamental of experience. So I have to kind of switch my brain to try to think how to explain it. So when we're growing up, we're always taught that we are an identity, and that identity is interacting with the world. So for me, I was called Lisa. I loved drama. I loved the arts at school. I enjoyed playtime at school. I didn't like going to school. I was fairly happy when I was younger. It changed in teenage years, but before that I was fairly happy, easygoing, plumpy. I know that's weird, but it is an identity that we identify with, like I am plumpy. Bit of a nerd, bit geeky. I loved surveillance families. If you're English, British, or maybe American, or maybe that's all over the world, these things called surveillance families, it was just like my thing. And we begin to believe that that is who we are. So I can like say all these things that this body liked, and what my imagination of the past is, and we make this like story. We weave together an identity out of that story, like different things, different memories, different images, different looks, and it becomes like an entity that is constantly being narrated inside the brain, or we don't really know where it is, but there is this narration like, I am good, I am bad, they are bad, they did wrong, why didn't they do this, they should have done that, I should have done this, I should have done that, I'm going here, I'm going there, I'm walking up a hill. And there is this narration going on, making it feel like there is a separate entity that's experiencing a separate world. And that's just like the way it is, I think, for 99.9% of humans. That there is somebody experiencing this world, and it becomes a physiological experience, like that it really, like the body kind of holds itself in a way where it really feels like there is something experiencing. Whereas non-duality is pointing to like not to-ness, that there isn't actually something experiencing this world. But that isn't intellectual. Like in the beginning it starts off as intellectual, and then there is this awakening and it becomes experiential, but it's not mental, so you can't really think about it. It's that right now there is speaking happening, but there is nobody speaking. We can name a character, there is Lisa speaking, but the experiential feeling is there is speaking happening, and also a Lisa character appearing, but it's not the experiencer of this. So the experiencer of this is undefined, is infinite, and you could say is no thing. So there's experiencing happening, but we can't find the experiencer. We can't say, oh, it's inside this head, or it's inside the computer, or inside the walls. There is, when you really have these energetic shifts, it's really seen that there is not a thing experiencing. But part of the functioning of this body is it arises with a character. So it's not about getting rid of the character. The body is always going to be conditioned, and there's going to be a narrative of a story that goes with this body. But it's always changing the character. It's always evolving. It's not a solid thing, but it comes with this body. But the energetic shift is that is no longer the experiencer, and this isn't an intellectual. It's not an intellectual knowing like, aha, and there is somebody or something narrating that and telling that, which is ultimately confusing. Like, I don't know how you communicate that. There is like a a deep knowing experientially, right here, right now, that there isn't a limitation on experiencing. It doesn't even go into a thought though, it's just the way it is. That this experience is not two, that there is no difference between the experiencer and the experience, but the experiencer can never be found. It's just oneness, it's not two-ness. So there is like this understanding that happens, and during the understanding of non-duality, there can be like a balancing out of illusion. Because when you believe you are this entity inside of the body, lots of illusions unfold, lots of false ideas and belief systems, and then they become feelings, and then the hormones change, and the chemicals change, and the neural pathways change, because it keeps narrating the story and telling this story which isn't actually true. So that tends to settle down, but also what happens is there is this this breakdown in thinking of being able to hold on to something. It's you could say it's a little bit like taking mushrooms or hallucinogenics. It's like you lose the center point, except it's not as extreme as that. But there is some part in the brain or the body, or we don't know what it is, that cannot hold on so tightly anymore to a person, to ideas, to thoughts. So when somebody says like the world is all black, and it is black, and that's the way it is, like there's another part that just doesn't really care about these types of things anymore. There's like a collapsing of this idea that what you're actually looking for is thought bound, thing bound, future bound. That the ideas become looser and looser and looser, and in that there is a shift that happens. We don't know if this shift is in the brain or what happens in this shift, but it's an energetic shift, and many people have spoken about it. Ekhart Tolle speaks very clearly about it in the beginning of The Power Now, The Power of Now. And you have these like oceanic oneness experiences. And these are experiences, but they shift something fundamentally. So you can have the experience so extremely that you can't move. Like some people, Ramana Maharshi, for years couldn't really move or do anything and went into silence, because it's really monumental to the system. So, and what happens in these awakening experiences is that the consciousness which is tied up in the person, so the consciousness and the person feel like they're one thing. So I am a conscious person inside this body, stops being entangled in that, and then the consciousness goes back to being where it's always been, which is in everything. So the experiencer, so the experience is that the experiencer is not inside the body or outside the body. It's not in a thing or not in a thing. You could say nothing or everything. It's the fundamental sense of being. To this moment, this is no longer being experienced from somewhere. So there is seeming watching from this body, but the fundamental feeling of being you, beyond you, feels unlimited and unbound, even though there is a looking from this angle. That's really bonkers. And in this awakening, it profoundly shifts the body-mind mechanism. And this is what I feel like a lot of spiritual teachers talk about. Also, some spiritual teachers don't talk about this. They talk about other things as awakening, and that's the way it is, life. Folks, life doesn't make sense. Everyone has different opinions. So I feel this is what the Buddha talked about, what Jesus talked about, like people that are having near-death experiences, is there is this oceanic love experience of oneness, and then there is a profound shift in the body-mind mechanism anymore, and that looking is no longer bound to the body anymore. However, then it can get expressed in all types of different ways. Like I hear some people having had that experience and then they interpret it as like the Holy Spirit is speaking through them, or like all their Kundalini energy is, all their chakras are open, all different types of ways. But I can kind of hear the basis of the experience. This, and I don't even care anymore about people's different interpretation of it. It does seem that sometimes people can have small ones of these and it doesn't really change much, or they then go back into deep suffering or illusion. To me, the most important part of that is afterwards the mind coming to a place where it really doesn't know jack shit, which is kind of ironic. It's like a reset, like you go back to being a baby. You're like, I don't know anything. There is nothing I can hold on to in this life. Like, it's kind of, you come back to this mystery. And then dependent on the way the body's been conditioned, it will speak about it in different ways. So I speak about it from a non-duality perspective because that's the way this body's been conditioned. I don't feel like it's more right anymore. I'm just not prepared to go into that. Who knows? So, and people can get to that place in the mind where the mind stops holding from things. From, I can see from yoga practice, from service practice, from neurology, like understand the brain, from psychology, so many different ways. So let's go to Ekhart Tolle. So in the beginning of The Power of Now, he explains this big big bang experience. So he's in deep suffering, and then there is some, I think he hears something which tells him to surrender or something, and there is a surrender, and then suddenly there's a huge energetic shift, and then the bird song is all that he can hear, and it's really beautiful, the detail of the bird song. And then for years after that, he was just walking around sitting on benches for a lot of the time. What happened here wasn't the same, but had similarities. I wasn't in deep suffering at that point, but in the previous month, I had lost my life, which I had. My life like had dramatically changed, but I've been through so much spirituality and spiritual training that I wasn't going into thoughts or fears about it. So they were coming up. I was really intensely feeling them, but there wasn't like a getting involved in that. And then something happened. I don't know why really, but this collapsing happened in my mind where the brain or the body couldn't hold on to this illusion anymore. And it was actually very peaceful prior and after when it happened here. Like I was just sitting there, and it was like slowly the looking expanded into everything, and it was really oceanically, amazingly beautiful. I was quite vulnerable at the time though, in the sense that I was in Bali all by myself. So I walked around like a child again, without really self-awareness or much or any self-awareness, and with my cognitive abilities like collapsing in a way. But I survived. But I now look back, I'm like, far out. You know, that could have been a disaster, but it wasn't, because that was the way it went. And this to me is the awakening. And then what is left after that is this deep knowing, or this intimacy with everything, which isn't intellectual. Yeah. So now we'll go on to some quotes from Ekhart Tolle. So if I continue my story with Ekhart Tolle, so I met him, I didn't meet him actually ever. I nearly met him in like 2004. I got invited to a talk, but I can't remember what happened. It didn't happen, I don't think. Oh God. Did I go? There was something in 2004 that happened. I went to this group, like this Ekhart Tolle group. Sorry, my memory is so bad, you'd think I'd remember that. but I don't. But I used to go to the Ekhart Tolle group, and I don't know where I got all his videos from. Like, I'd watch all his videos, and if it wasn't for his teaching, I wouldn't have then met Neo-Advaita, Tony Parsons, another teacher I love called Nathan Gill, and Ramesh Balsekar, Gangaji, like all these other beautiful teachers. So, because from Buddhism, it was just so far away. It was like the bridge. Yes, the bridge. So let's go to some quotes of him.